Okay, all right. So, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to my talk, Building a Zend Framework2 Application in Less Than a Talk. My name is Jan. I'm working for Zend Technologies, and actually it's a home game for me because I'm working in the Stuttgart office. So my hometown is 5 minutes from here away. So these are the conferences I like, very close to my home. Actually, I myself working as a solution consultant, so I'm not directly involved in the Zend Framework2 development. Actually, only 3 people for Zend are working only 24 hours a day for Zend Framework2. The rest is really done by the community. So there's a large community around Zend Framework, but of course the project lead Matthew Biofinius is working for Zend, and also Enrico Zimuel from Italy, from which I borrowed the slides, I have to say, are involved in Zend Framework development, and also Ralf Schindler, also in the US. It will become, at least for me, an exciting talk because I have only, I think, 13, 14 more or less ugly slides. The rest I will do on the fly, on demand. So I want to create a simple blog application using the Zend framework. And in contrary to the talk by Andreas Hooks about Symfony, who talked about the components of Symfony, I'm going to talk about the full stack, the full framework, full stack framework, and not directly about the components. So, blog application. For a blog application, we need, in the simplest of all manners, we need at least 2 tables in the database. We need a user table for authentication, and we need also a post table where we can store our contents which we are posting. You see here that there's also a relation between the user ID and the post table to the user table on the left side. Actually, just that you have seen it, this is what I have prepared already for the talk. I've created a database which is already available with these fields, so nothing spectacular here. The only thing you can see, I'm using MySQL here. So let's start. In the first step, I want to install the skeleton application, the Zend skeleton application. And this is always a good idea to start if you're completely new to Zend Framework2. If you install this Zend skeleton application, you can better understand how the Zend framework is actually set up, how it's being configured, how you can use it, and you can install it in different ways. So you see here, for example, that the first line is using Composer. Probably most of you heard about Composer. And of course, we can also use a ZFTool component. So instead of using Composer, although this is a thing I will use in the first step, you can also use a FAR file in order to create the project. We will use the ZFTool FAR internally in my Zend Studio. I will use Zend Studio as an IDE in order to create a module of Zend Framework. But this will come to step 7 or 8 or so. So in the first step, I switch to my Zend Studio, and you see here I have some fallback projects already implemented. I will create a new project. And actually, I'm choosing the Composer project from existing package. As I've said, the Zend skeleton app is can be installed by Composer, and I give it a name. Let's say ZF2 blog. And in the next step, and hopefully, so please stop downloading anything right now, because now I'm accessing the Composer packages. If you search for skeleton wrong key, application, and disable the show projects only, then you will find it's the first step, the Zend Framework skeleton application. And this is actually the really cool thing about Composer, that it will install, it downloads now everything for you. It will create so Zend Studio will create a project for me, it downloads the Zend Framework and downloads the first application which you can already run. And here you see, here we have ZF2 blog, and if I open it, you will see that it has already created several folders for me, and this is actually the skeleton application which we are using as a basis for our blog application. In order to show it to you, I will quickly deploy it on the server because actually now it's only available on my local system. This is not part of the talk, but I will use Zend server for this, for deploying the application. And yeah, this should be it. And this should not happen. This is always a problem with the timing of the VMware. 1 second, please. You see, I did it already once or twice before. So now the server should be the same time as my laptop. And again, all right, this looks good. So I try to deploy it again. All right, and now you see here I've tried it before ZFTool blog, and now it should be available directly in my browser. So these are the first steps you have to do in order to have a full working Zend Framework2 application. Of course, the deployment feature which I've shown to you, this is part of, or mostly part of Zend server. Of course, you can use your normal, sorry, hair in my mouth. Of course, you can use your normal way to deploy it, whether you use subversion or you just point the document root to your directory. So it's up to you how you do it, but this is actually the fastest way how to do it. And so that I do not have to deploy it on every single change, I will also open the properties and I enable the automatic upload so that I will so that every change will automatically upload it to the server. So it's ZFTool blog version 1.0.0. This should work. Okay. So this is a first step in order to install Zend Framework2. And back to the folders which we see here. The first thing which comes to mind where you're going to look at is a public folder. The public folder is, of course, the folder which is the document root of your web server, and we are going to the index.php by default. And actually, you see also that there's not so many things in there. Actually, the interesting thing is that it already uses an autoloader file, which is created automatically by Composer. So this is a very good thing about Composer, and the and in conjunction with Zend Framework, you do not have to take care at all about auto-loading, because this is automatically done by the PSR standards that you can use it immediately. The interesting thing is that you start an MVC application. So this is how it's used, MVC application, and I'm initializing it with a configuration, and finally I'm running this object which I'm getting back. And this is the first thing I would like to go into, the application config.php, because this is a central configuration file, and instead of using YAML files or ini files, actually ini files were used as a configuration file in Zend Framework 1. In Zend Framework 2, everything is now arrays. Actually, it's because it's faster. So if you use directly PHP arrays for configuration, it's faster than just first converting from YAML or from ini files or XML or whatever. Of course, if you want to stay with ini files or XML or whatever, you can still do so, but the default of Zend Framework is now arrays. And what you can see here in the configuration array is that I'm specifying modules, modules which are automatically loaded by the full stack. In this case, it's application. This is the skeleton application. And you will see later on that we also add several more modules to this. You can also specify some listen options here. This is information where Zend Framework is looking for new modules. So you see here, it's a module folder, and it's also a vendor folder. Actually, vendor is, let's say, third-party libraries which you can use and want to plug in. You put them onto vendor. If you want to implement something at your own, you're using the module folder. And finally, there's also something interesting. If you want to add your own configuration files, you should place them in the config autoload folder and call them global or local.php. So database.local.php or foo.global.php. Everything is loaded fully automatically if it contains global or local.php. The difference between those two is because, of course, you want to have something on your local environment, or you want to have some configuration files for your production system, for example. Actually, this is it what's by default in the application.config.php. Everything else is some information or some documentation about it, how you can use it, how you can extend it. But as I only have 45 minutes, I will skip this part. So if you go back to the folders, and we have seen that we specified the module folder, and actually in the module folder there's also an application folder. An application folder, here is my complete module which defines my skeleton application, the application which we have just seen in the browser. And we will also see that we do not touch this at all, but we will create our own module afterwards, a plug module. And finally, one thing which might be interesting or important is the heart of a module is a module.php, which is here. This is the module.php. This is, let's say, it's used for bootstrapping the module, so for configuring, for initializing. It's also for specifying the module configuration, which you see here, because the module can have itself, also, of course, a configuration. And then we also specify here, for example, the autoloader config, so that the module files are also automatically loaded. In this special case, I completely understand if this looks completely weird, but in this here it says only that if you specify something which is called application, which is actually the namespace, the current namespace, it looks in the right directory dependent on the namespace. We are using the standard autoloader from Zend framework for this. There are several other autoloaders which you can use. You can create your own autoloader, but this is, let's say, the standard for the Zend framework application. And as we have seen also the module.config PHP, I can also open this to you. And again, array of array of array of array. It's really, I was, at the very first beginning, I was also very confused about the array stuff, because sometimes it's really hard to read, and you have to get familiar with it, but then it's actually, I find it more easier than using INI files, for example, because you're faster in writing, and you have also some code completion here, thanks to the IDEs. But we will come back to the module.config PHP later. What you can see here is that we're defining the routing. Yeah? So if you just type the slash, so if you're accessing the root of the application, then it should go to the application controller index and is calling the index action. But as I said, we come back to this later. So we go to this. Well, this was our first step. Yeah, we have already installed it in our Zend Studio. We have seen that this was working, and now the next step, which is, of course, you would say, well, this is some advanced feature, but we will now directly implement authentication, because we want to have an authentication. An authenticated user for writing blog posts, and this is what we are doing immediately here. And what we only have to do is we are using a third-party module. We are using the ZFC user component, which is available also thanks to Composer. And let me see. Now, and then we finally also configure the stuff immediately. So here you see that we create the database just use the schema.sql directly from the module. I've done this already so that we do not have to do this again. Then I have to configure the database access. Of course, the module itself does not know anything about my database credentials. And finally, I have to enable the ZFC user module in my application. And remember the application configuration where I have enabled all the modules. There I have to place the ZFC base and ZFC user, because the ZFC user is also based on the ZFC base. And this I have to do now. All right. So what I can do, I can now open the composer JSON. So I will not modify it manually, but I will open it right here. And I can say I want to add the ZFC user. Here you see, ZF comments ZFC user. Of course, one thing I have to warn about, there are a lot of modules available, and this is really great because the module technology in Zend Framework 2 is also the heart of the Zend Framework 2, because you can completely develop independent modules. I can take this module, put it in a different application, and it should work automatically because there are no dependencies between the modules. But of course, if you're using some third-party modules, please be careful. It's not provided by Zend or by the Zend Framework community. Everybody can implement its own module, can upload, publish it, and then you can use it, of course, but of course you never know what the developers developed in this module. ZF Commons is widely used. This is a very good source so that I can use it also for the authentication. Then I have to save it, update the dependencies, and now you see in the console window that it's installing now the authentication. And that's it. Now I have a new folder in my vendor directory, hopefully. Here you see ZF Commons, ZFC base, ZFC user. This has been installed automatically directly by the composer update. Finally, I have to do now the database configuration, and instead of implementing it myself, I will take it from a project so that you are not bored because of some dump writing. So I will copy this database local.php, and I open it also so that you get an idea of what is happening in this database local.php. Please remember that it's automatically loaded because it contains local.php. You see also that I've defined the DB params database, username, password, hostname, and so on. And then you see also that I'm returning an array with a key service manager. And actually this is also something very important in Zend Framework 2, because the service manager is something comparable to a dependency injection container. It's actually not the same. The service manager is implementing the service locator pattern. So you have a little bit more control, you have to do a little bit more programming, but then you can use all the objects which you're defining in the service manager globally in your whole project, and you define here the dependency. So you see the Zend/db or \db\adapter. This is a key. This is a key which I'm using directly in my in my application. You can choose whatever you like you use, but this can be important because this is a key which is used by the ZFC user actually. And then you see here, I'm creating a new database adapter where I have to specify these components borrowed from the DB params array above. All right. So this is the first thing I have to do. Now I have also, I forgot what I have to do else in order to make it work. Right, if I go to the vendor directory, ZF Commons, ZFC user, here's the configuration file. And here see, for example, that this configuration file is also loaded. And if I type in the /user root, I should now be able to access my user module. So let's try. And this is not good. Let me think whether I've forgotten something. Right, yeah, I forgot this. Enable ZFC user in the application, because now I cannot find anything about it. So just go back to the application config.php. This is the wrong project, so now I'm getting confused. So here, ZFC user, base, and ZFC user. And now, cross the fingers, still, that's not good. All right, let me check whether I forgot something else. Database local. No. This one. Copy the options file. Right, there's this here, correct. This I will also copy, which is actually directly available in the vendor directory. Not in Composer, but ZF Commons, ZFC user, config. Here you have ZFC user global php.dist. Of course, this is already described, or everything is described in the README, what you have to do in order to implement it. Paste it in here, rename it to PHP, and we can also have a look in it. Actually, we're using all the defaults, but here you can specify, for example, the adapter. And remember that what we have done in the configuration, we have specified the ZendDB adapter. So if I go back to the database local, here, ZendDB adapter. This is available thanks to the service manager. So also ZFC user global.php can access this database adapter. I do not have to remove these lines because it will use this also as default, although I can remove it. And now hopefully, did it upload everything? I'm not. Okay, actually, I have no idea what's happening here. This is not good, but therefore I have this, of course I have this fallback, and I will just quickly jump to this, because if you go now to user, pardon me? Crap module. You should really think about using third-party modules now. So I'm not sure actually what happened now. Maybe I forgot something, or maybe not all of the things are distributed to the server. I do not know. The idea is, of course, that you have this now without writing one line of code. It's just using Composer, just copying from here to there some configuration files, and then you have already a sign-in functionality. You have also sign-up functionality. Foo at zend.com, for example. It also has some validation checks, so the input is less than 6 characters long. So I will just add some numbers here, and now I'm directly logged in. And it will also use the gravatar functionality in order to show the picture. And of course, you can also sign out immediately. So this is really interesting because you do not have to implement one line of code, and it has effect directly on the rest of the application. But of course, I want to add some more functionality. And this is, of course, a little bit stupid now because it's not working in my example. So that I will only show to you what I planned to copy and use. The next step, of course, will be creating the blog module. So after we have implemented the authentication, I want now to create my own business logic. For this, I'm creating the blog module. I will also create the post form, the post model, and the post table. The post form, of course, is for the representation in the view, that you see the view, or see the form directly in your view. The model is taking care for handling the data. It's a data container which is also responsible for storing the data with the help of the post table class, and the post table class extends the table gateway. The table gateway is, it's not really an ORM wrapper in Zend Framework 2. It's very close to it, but it does not have, for example, the same functionality as Doctrine. It's more lightweight, easier to use, and for a start, it's very good to use it. So if you want to use something like Doctrine, of course, this is also possible with Zend Framework 2. You can just install the Doctrine module and use it. We will use the so-called table gateway post table method. And instead of copying across, I will just show it to you where these should take place. Of course, first I could show you how we create the blog module itself. So what you can do in Zend Studio again, you can use Zend Framework item, choose Zend module, and then you can specify the module name and also the controller name. So name it to blog, controller name can be index or post or whatever, I don't know. And then it will automatically create the module for you. And not only the module, but also the files around it. So if I have a look here in my blog final application, I have created the blog module, and it will create automatically the config directory, source directory, a tests directory, and also the view directory. The first thing we want to have a look at is the source directory. Here you can find again a folder which is called blog. At the beginning it was very confusing for me that you first have to call the module blog and then also the folder in the source folder blog, but this is some kind of a best practice how to use it. And in this blog folder you find the controller, the form, and the model. The form is the most easy part, actually, because here you see that the post form, which I'm creating especially for posting a post, extends the Zend form. And here you can specify how such fields should look like. So you just add some fields, for example, a hidden field with the name post ID. You will also add the title, which is a text field. You can also specify some style sheet classes so that I can use also the Twitter Bootstrap style sheets more easily. This is what I have not mentioned before, but the Zend Framework skeleton application is using the Twitter Bootstrap. Then I'm also adding a text area, and finally I'm also adding a submit button. Of course, you could also create for each form element your own objects if you want, but Zend Form is taking care for you, so you just have to specify the type or the ID, the name, and then everything is done for you. Next to the form, we also know that we want to create the post and the post table. Let's start with the post table. And the post table, here you see that it expects in the constructor the table gateway object. We will see later on how we instantiate such a post table class or object. Here you see that, for example, I'm generating some convenient functionalities, convenient methods in order to, let's say, fetch all of the items which are available. So here you see, for example, I'm using the select method of the table gateway, and I'm just returning the result set. I'm also able to fetch a post by ID. Here you see table gateway again is using the select function where you also specify in an array the the where clause, and finally I'm checking the current row of it, and again the save post is very, very similar. Here I'm just deciding whether it's an update or it's a completely new post which I want to do, and finally I'm using the insert or the update functionality of the table gateway. The cool thing about the table gateway is that it provides the CRUD methods fully automatically. You do not have to take care about it. Everything is taken from the table gateway, also the delete functionality here. And finally, not the post table, but the post.php. This is the interesting part about the post, about this model here, is that it implements the input filter aware interface. This means that this model is taking care for filtering, for validating whether the submitted data is okay. And for example, here you can see that I have an input filter which I'm creating here, and for each field I'm checking, for example, for the post ID, which was a hidden field, whether it's actually an integer. And I'm also, for the title field, I'm also filtered by tag, so every tag is stripped. I strip also white space. And finally, I check also for string length. I can also specify the encoding. So this is the validator. I want to check whether everything is okay. And finally, do I have something else? Right. Yeah, just specify that for the content, the element is required. I do not have any other validators here. And so this is an interesting thing, because in the post model, you're taking care for the validation and also for the filtering, so that you can be sure if you use the content out of the input filter and want to store it in the database, that everything is filtered and validated accordingly. Okay, so now we have just simple classes. Now the interesting thing is how we can make them accessible in your controller. So of course you want to use in the controller the post form. You want to display it somehow. In order to make it possible, we have to go back to the module.php. As I said, it's a very important part, the module.php. And here we have several methods which follow some conventions. So we have seen the get autoloader config. Here you see, for example, also a second autoloader where I use a class map. So it's not defining the class path automatically, but it's using just a map for this. And as a fallback, I'm using the same structure as we have seen earlier. The get config we have seen also earlier, but we haven't seen, for example, the get service config. The get service config is also for filling the service manager with some class information. And here you specify, as we have seen this in the application config, we specify some post table gateway. This again is just an identifier. And here I'm creating a new table gateway object. And this is what I'm returning. The table gateway object, you see that here I specify the post. Post is nothing else than the table name. I'm also passing the DB adapter, which is also used from the database.local.php, which we have inserted earlier. And I'm also specifying the result set prototype, because I want to have an array object as a result back. You can specify only arrays, only objects. In this case, we're using array object prototype. And here I'm also putting in an instance of my post class. And this post table gateway I'm using here in the block model post table. I'm calling the service manager, which is automatically passed over to an anonymous function. The service manager, I'm just fetching the post table gateway. This is this. And then I'm creating a new post table, and I'm passing over the table gateway and return the table. So when I'm now calling in my controller Service manager, please give me block model post table. Everything is done fully automatically for me. So the database adapter is created for me. The table gateway is created for me because this is what the service manager is taking care for. And with such a technology, you become completely independent. So if you want to change the table gateway, you just have to, for example, you can just copy this part here and just change the index, for example. So, of course, the goal should be that you're completely independent from all of your modules, that you can also test it, unit test it, and this is how you can do it, because with such a technique, it's very easy to exchange, for example, the post table gateway with a mock object, for example. All right. So now we have created all the models. In the next step, I wanted to create my controllers. I have only two controllers. I have an index controller and I have a post controller. The index controller is for displaying all the posts, and the post controller is for creating the posts. Obviously for adding and for editing the posts. And you see also that I have not only the PHP file, but I also have a PHTML file. Actually, Zend Framework2, or Zend Framework in general, is using PHP as a template engine. So you're using real PHP in your Vue templates. You can, of course, also integrate something like Twig for Symfony if you want, or Smarty if you want. There are modules available for this that you can implement your favorite template engine, but by default we're using the PHP itself. So just have a look very quickly, because the time is running, in the controllers. In the index controller, nothing spectacular here. Index controller is extending abstract action controller. We have an index action, and here we see that I'm just returning a new Vue model, which is not mandatory. You can also just return an array, and I'm just put in an array with posts, and I'm just calling this getPostTable, fetch all. You know this fetch all method, we have seen it before, and in the getPostTable, I'm getting the service locator. This is the SM, and then this post table is SM get block model post table. So actually the index which we have defined in the module.php. And for this we have also a corresponding Vue file. The Vue is directly in here, Vue block index, index.phTML, and this looks somehow like HTML. As I've said, it's a mixture between PHP and HTML, so I'm using PHP as a template engine, and I'm just can use now here the posts variable, which I have specified here. So these are available as variables. I'm just looping over all posts, and I'm just outputting it. Here also checking whether the user identity is in place, and I also display an edit function, for example. But this is all I have to do. And finally, I can hopefully show it to you. If I go back to home, you see that this is the result. I have, of course, filled a little bit the database, and you see also that I'm logged in. That's why I can now edit the stuff, and I can also click on the post button here, and then I can add a post. We haven't seen how this is working. Therefore, I just go back to the controllers, and we open the post controller, and actually here's a little bit more work to do, but we see that we are just fetching the form object. We are adding a value to the submit field. This is not interesting, and I'm checking whether the request was posted. Here I can check whether the form is valid, and finally I'm also fetching some user identity. I completely understand that this is nothing which can be done out of the box, but finally I just have to say save the post, and I paste over the post object with the user ID, and then the table itself is taking care for storing the post. actually, it looks very similar to the edit action. One could have used this both together. And in order to show you just the appropriate PHTML file, because this is also something which can be interesting. Here in the PHTML file, I set also the action. I want to specify where to post to. And what you also can see, I'm using the form object directly in here and calling something like form row. The form row is actually expecting a form element which can be title. And the interesting thing is that it will also create automatically the label field for me. Right, that's it. I know we are running a little bit out of time. I just want to also mention that you can also override the layout. The layout is a basis of everything. The layout will give you the footer, the header, where you have to specify it only once. This can be overwritten in the module.config.php. Last but not least, I just want to mention how I have combined the authentication, which I have implemented before, and my blog module, because before we just have said, okay, we can authenticate, but we never said, okay, what we have to do in order to need an authentication for a blog post. And this can be done on a central place, and this is very important, also in the module.php. And this is the last thing I want to show to you, going back to the module.php. Here you see that we have an onBootstrap event. Zend Framework2 is completely event-based. So this is called automatically, and I'm attaching another event, which is called if the routing has been done. And in this event here, I'm just checking whether the user has an identity, for example. So is he really authenticated? And if he's not authenticated, I can specify that I want to set some headers to the response. For example, I said here's the status code 302, and this is done for every controller, for every action, beside the things which I have specified in the whitelist. So I do not want to have it for the login, for the register, and for the home. I'm checking this also directly here. So whether it's in the array of the list, then I do not need the authentication. And then I can just return so that nothing is happening, so that the normal workflow can take in place. All right. Actually, this is what I wanted to show you. I want to give you a short introduction to Zend Framework2. I know that not everything is very intuitive at the first step. I can only tell you that it can become, or it makes real fun if you start programming with it. Again, we have seen now the full stack framework where you can implement the whole application with a framework, but you can of course also use only parts of the application. So if you only want to use a DB connection, or if you want to use, for example, configuration, accessing libraries, then you can of course use only the modules. That's it. Dankeschön. So we started 5 minutes late, so we are in time. Any questions? Okay. Sure.